The rooster crowed as the first breath of dawn swept across the modest backyard of the Benson household. Zena opened her eyes before the light could fully filter through the narrow windows. Her body ached from another night on the cold cement floor beside the kitchen door. That spot had become her bed since her stepmother Clara decided that real daughters deserved real rooms. Zena moved slowly, stretching limbs stiff from the chill, then reached for her faded scarf, tying it tightly around her hair. Without a word spoken to her, she picked up the worn-out broom and began sweeping the compound. The yard was littered with dry leaves, plastic wrappers, and sand from the day before. As she swept, dust clung to her bare feet, but she didn't stop. Complaining only led to slaps or worse. She had learned that early. Zena was beautiful in a way that made some people uneasy. Her skin was deep brown, like polished wood, her features soft but resilient, and her eyes calm like a river just before the rain. But in her house, beauty meant nothing, or rather, it meant trouble. Clara had hated Zena from the start, not for anything she did, but for simply being alive. Zena's mother died giving birth to her. Mr. Benson remarried 2 years later, bringing Clara into the home with soft words and quiet manners. But soon after the wedding, Clara showed her true self. "That child is cursed," she often whispered into Mr. Benson's ears. "She brings misfortune." Over time, the man who once called Zena his light began treating her like a shadow. Her half-sisters Naomi and Tricia, both daughters of Clara, mirrored their mother's cruelty. They laughed at Zena's old clothes, mocked her silence, and assigned her chores no servant would envy. And there were actual servants in the house, clean, uniformed, and paid, but it was Zena who cooked every meal, scrubbed every floor, and ironed every school uniform. She wasn't allowed to eat with the family. Most nights she went to sleep on an empty stomach, her only pillow a bundle of clothes wrapped in a sack. "Why do they hate me?" she had once whispered to the wall, tears soaking her makeshift bed. In the morning, she served Naomi and Tricia their breakfast. In the afternoon, she washed their laundry under the sun. In the evening, she prepared dinner and cleaned the bathrooms. She fetched water, swept the compound twice a day, and always made sure the house was spotless before anyone noticed she existed. No one ever thanked her. No one ever asked if she was okay. One Sunday morning, while the rest of the family dressed in shiny shoes and lace gowns for church, Zena stayed behind to boil water and peel yam for lunch. After finishing, she carried a faded blue bucket to the village stream. That was when she saw him. He sat beneath the tall baobab tree beside the dusty road. His clothes were torn, his hair tangled like wild grass, and his eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that made her pause. Children ran past him, shouting, "Crazy man! Crazy man!" But he didn't move. Zena didn't run. She stared. There was something about the way he sat, shoulders slightly hunched but still proud, that made her walk closer. From the folds of her wrapper, she brought out a piece of bread she had saved from the kitchen scraps. "You look hungry," she said softly, holding it out. The man said nothing, but his hand reached forward, took the bread gently, and nodded once. Zena offered a faint smile and turned to leave. She didn't know he kept watching her long after she disappeared around the bend. She didn't know her life was about to change. The man she had fed was not mad. His name was Elijah, and he was a billionaire. Elijah sat quietly under the tree, chewing the hard bread slowly. It was dry and tasteless, but it warmed him more than any fine meal. Not because of the food, but because of the heart behind it. He had been watching this village for days, pretending to be a lunatic, sleeping in corners, rejected by all. He had come here not looking for charity or praise, but for honesty, for truth. His past had been paved with gold, yet love had always slipped through his fingers. Women smiled at him only when his wallet opened. One woman, Melissa, had nearly destroyed him. She had plotted to steal his company shares, lied to his parents, even tried to pin fraud on him. He barely escaped the trap thanks to a loyal friend. That day, Elijah made a vow. He told his parents he was leaving the city. "I want to find someone who sees me," he said. "Not my money, not my name, just me." His father, furious, forbade it. His mother cried, warning of dangers. But Elijah had already packed. He left his mansion, his phone, his suits, and took only a bag of old clothes. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked like a stranger, but that was the point. In the village, he slept by the roadside. He washed in the river. He begged for food, and every door slammed in his face. Until Zena. She didn't flinch. She didn't call him names. She gave what little she had and walked away without asking for anything in return. Elijah couldn't stop thinking about her. He began watching her from a distance, not with obsession, but with deep curiosity. He saw how she was treated like a servant in her own home. He saw her sweeping in the morning and weeping at night. He saw her serve everyone, then eat alone, sitting by the back door with her knees hugged to her chest. She never raised her voice. She never answered insults. She endured with a kind of quiet strength that stirred something deep inside him. He had found her, but he had to be sure. One hot afternoon, Zena sat on a small stool peeling cassava in the yard. Her fingers were raw, and sweat dripped down her brow. Clara watched her from the window with a smug smile. Inside the house, Naomi and Tricia laughed as they recorded dances on their phones, the fan blowing cool air around them. Then came the creak of the gate. Rarely did strangers walk in uninvited, but that day Elijah stepped through, his shirt torn, his sandals barely holding together, his hair still wild. The gatekeeper jumped forward, confused. "Who are you?" he barked. Elijah raised a hand, calm. "Please, I mean no harm. I came to speak to the man of this house." Clara stormed out, arms on her hips. "You?" she sneered. "Do you know where you are?" Elijah bowed slightly. "I have a request." Zena looked up, her heart racing. She recognized him. The man from the road. What was he doing here? Mr. Benson emerged moments later, frowning. "What nonsense is this?" Elijah looked him in the eye. "Sir, I've seen something in this house I wish to keep. I want to marry one of your daughters." Silence fell, then laughter. Clara laughed so loud the birds in the tree took flight. "You?" she said, wheezing. "Which of my daughters? Look at yourself." Naomi and Tricia joined the chaos, jeering. "Maybe he's blind," Tricia giggled. "Or mad for real," Naomi added. Mr. Benson was ready to throw him out, but Clara's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Let him marry someone," she said sweetly. "Yes, let him marry our helper, Zena. She's not really our daughter anyway." Mr. Benson paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes, good idea. Let her be useful for once." Zena stood frozen, her eyes welled with tears. "Papa, please." "Silence," he roared. "You will marry him. You should be grateful someone wants you at all." Elijah looked at her then, not with joy, not even with hope, but with sorrow. Zena ran inside and collapsed on the floor. Her heart broke in ways she didn't know it could. Tomorrow, she would be forced to marry a man the whole village thought was mad. and no one cared how she felt. The morning sun climbed slowly over the rooftops of the quiet village, its rays stretching into the windows like gentle fingers waking the world. But inside the Benson household, Zena sat motionless at the edge of her wooden cot, staring at the tattered wedding gown laid beside her. It was not new. It wasn't even hers. It had once belonged to Tricia, discarded after she tore the lace in the back during a photo shoot. Clara had handed it to Zena the night before without a word, as if tossing a rag to a street vendor. The fabric was yellowing, the hem uneven, and the zipper barely worked. But, in Clara's words, "It's good enough for a girl who's marrying trash." Zena's reflection stared back at her from the cracked mirror nailed to the wall. Her face looked pale, her lips dry, her eyes red from a night of weeping. She touched her cheek softly, as if hoping the skin had changed, as if wishing that today wasn't real. She reached for the old brush and slowly dragged it through her tangled hair. "Don't waste time," Clara shouted from outside, her voice sharp like broken glass. "People are already waiting at the church. At least look like a wife, not a funeral ghost." Zena didn't respond. She stood, slipped into the dress, and stepped out into the compound where murmurs met her immediately. "That's her," a woman whispered. "The one marrying the lunatic." "It's a pity," another added. "But maybe she's mad too." Zena kept her eyes on the ground. The village church loomed ahead, small and weathered, but today it was full. Not because people cared about her happiness, but because they came to witness the joke unfold. Elijah stood near the altar, dressed in the same torn clothes. His hair still wild, his face still smudged, his sandals barely holding together. He looked like someone who had wandered in from the bush. The pastor glanced at him nervously, sweat forming on his brow. He had been paid already by Mr. Benson to officiate, but even he wasn't sure if this was a wedding or a scandal waiting to explode. The wooden pews groaned under the weight of the curious. Naomi and Tricia sat near the front, dressed in colorful wrappers, their eyes sparkling with mischief. Clara sat beside them, fanning herself with pride. Mr. Benson crossed his arms, nodding to men in the audience like a man who had accomplished something great. Zena walked slowly down the aisle. There was no music, no flowers, no proud father on her arm, just silence, broken by the occasional giggle or muffled remark. She reached Elijah's side and stood stiff, her hands shaking. The pastor cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "We are gathered here today," he said, though no one really listened. Zena's heart pounded against her chest. She couldn't hear the words. They blurred into static. When the time came for her to speak, the pastor looked at her kindly, almost apologetically. "Do you, Zena Benson, take this man?" She didn't answer. Clara's voice rang from the back. "Speak, girl. Say yes before he changes his mind." Zena closed her eyes. "I do," she whispered, so softly it almost vanished into air. Then came the part everyone had waited for, the unveiling. The pastor turned to Elijah. "You may now remove your head covering." Elijah nodded and slowly untied the cloth wrapped around his head. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He wiped his face carefully. Beneath the dirt, his skin was smooth and warm-toned. The congregation leaned forward. He pulled off the ragged shirt to reveal a crisp white shirt underneath, perfectly ironed. Gasps began to ripple through the crowd. "Wait," someone muttered. "That's not a madman." Elijah reached up, grabbed the tangled wig, and removed it. Underneath was a neatly trimmed haircut. Silence fell like a thunderclap. People sat stunned. Naomi's mouth dropped. Trisha clutched her fan like it had betrayed her. Clara blinked furiously, her hand frozen in mid-fan. Mr. Benson stared, his eyes darting from Elijah to Zena to the pastor. Elijah stepped forward and pulled out a folded letter from his chest pocket. He turned to Zena and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the words. "I came to find love," it began. "Not pity, not fear, not desire, love, and I found it in you. Thank you for giving me bread when you had none. Forgive me for the pain I caused to see your truth." Zena's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Elijah, now standing tall, every trace of madness erased. The man the village mocked was a billionaire in disguise. Elijah turned to face the crowd. "Some of you came here to laugh," he said, "some to mock. But I came looking for something none of you could offer. I came looking for a heart that saw beyond dust and torn clothes." He looked at Clara, Naomi, and Trisha. "You thought you were handing off trash, but you were giving away treasure." Clara tried to speak, but no words came. Elijah turned to Mr. Benson. "You didn't ask her if she wanted this. You didn't protect your daughter. You offered her up like a burden." Mr. Benson shifted uncomfortably. "Please," he began, but Elijah raised a hand. "Don't speak. Not now." Then he looked at Zena again. "You don't have to come with me. You were brought here against your will. I'm not keeping you. The choice is yours now." The room held its breath. Zena stood still, the letter still open in her hand. She looked around the church, the pews filled with people who never saw her until this very moment. Her father, who had never hugged her. Her sisters, who had never shared their clothes. Her stepmother, who had only ever seen her as a stain in the house. And then Elijah, who stood before her, not demanding but offering. She looked at the locket still in her hand, the one he gave her the night before under the mango tree. Slowly, her fingers closed around it. She took one step forward and looked at the pastor. "I have something to say," she said softly. The pastor nodded, stepping aside. Zena turned to face the church. "All my life," she began, "I was told I wasn't enough. I was never invited to sit at the table. I was never celebrated, never heard." Her voice did not shake. "You gave me away because you believed I was nothing. But today, for the first time, I was given a choice, and I choose him." Elijah didn't smile. He simply looked at her with that same gaze that made her stop on the roadside all those days ago. The pastor lifted his hands. "Then, by the power vested in me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no applause, just silence. Heavy, powerful, transforming. Clara sat frozen. Naomi covered her mouth. Trisha whispered something no one heard. Mr. Benson looked down at his feet. Zena and Elijah turned. Together they walked down the aisle, no cheers, no flowers, just space opening before them. No longer a maid, no longer a joke, just a woman who was finally seen. The car door shut softly behind her, sealing Zena inside a world she had never imagined for herself. As the vehicle rolled away from the village, leaving behind dusty roads, murmuring mouths, and stunned silence, Zena sat still, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't speak, and Elijah didn't press her to. The man beside her remained quiet, his posture composed, his eyes staring out the window at nothing in particular. The car moved with a smoothness she wasn't used to, the leather seat unfamiliar against her back. When she glanced at him, she saw not the madman from the roadside, but a stranger in polished silence, a man who had seen her pain and chosen to walk beside it. The gate of his estate opened automatically as the car approached. Zena's breath caught at the sight. Fountains glittered in the sunlight, flowers bloomed in symmetrical arcs, and the house, no, mansion, rose like something from a dream, all glass and stone and quiet grace. Staff in crisp uniforms stood in a neat line, waiting. As the car stopped, one man opened the door and bowed slightly. "Welcome home, sir. Welcome, madam." Zena didn't move at first. Her legs felt like they didn't belong to her. Elijah stepped out first, then turned and extended a hand. She hesitated, then placed her fingers in his, letting him help her out as cameras she could not see inside the walls caught her first steps into a new life. They walked through the grand entrance, the doors pushed open by two staff members who bowed and stepped aside. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the soft light from chandeliers above. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, and quiet music played from somewhere unseen. Zena had never seen a place so pristine, so untouched by hardship. She stood in the middle of the foyer, unsure where to look. Elijah gently touched her elbow and led her forward. He didn't speak much, just showed her around living room, dining room, indoor garden, kitchen larger than the house she grew up in. She nodded politely, saying thank you too many times, not sure if it was enough. That evening, she sat in a guest room, though Elijah told her she could choose any room in the mansion. Her clothes had already been replaced with soft gowns. Her feet now wore slippers that didn't cut her skin. She was clean, but her heart still felt like it was carrying stones. Elijah knocked once on the door, then entered with an envelope in hand. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice gentle. Zena took the envelope with unsure fingers and opened it slowly. It was a letter, written in elegant handwriting. As she read, her lips parted in disbelief. "Dear Zena," it began, "when Elijah first told us about his plan, I feared for him. I did not want my son walking through the world in disguise. But then he said something that touched me. He said, 'Mother, I want to be seen not as a billionaire, not as a prize, but as a man who has a heart that longs to be known.' He found you. And from what I've heard, you didn't just see him. You honored him. You gave him bread, but more than that, you gave him dignity. That is more valuable than any gold in this house. You are welcome here, not because you married into wealth, but because your soul is richer than anything we own." Zena stopped reading, her vision blurred. She looked at Elijah, who had taken a seat across from her, his face unreadable. "Your mother wrote this?" she asked. He nodded. "She wanted me to give it to you after the wedding. She couldn't attend. She's recovering from surgery. But she already calls you daughter." Zena looked down at the letter again, touched it like it was sacred. "I've never received anything like this before," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not even a card, not even a thank you." "I know," he replied. "That's why this is only the beginning." She looked up, and for the first time her eyes didn't hold fear. There was something blooming there, uncertain, tender, but real. "Can I write a letter?" she asked. Elijah smiled. "Anything you want." She stood and walked into the study, sat down, and for the first time in her life, she wrote not out of obligation, but from a place deep within. When she returned, she handed him the folded paper. "Please send this to my father," she whispered. He nodded. Back in the village, the Benson household had lost its noise. Clara sat at the edge of the bed, her wrapper crumpled, her hands shaken. Naomi and Tricia no longer bickered over perfume or shoes. Mr. Benson stared at the gate that used to define his pride. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. The envelope was plain, but the weight of it could be felt through the paper. Mr. Benson opened it with trembling fingers. The words inside were simple. "Dear Father, I have forgiven you, not because I have forgotten, but because I want peace. I have found love, and in it I found my worth. You may never understand what it feels like to be invisible in your own home, but I hope your heart remembers me one day not as your maid, but as your daughter." Mr. Benson wept, but Zena never returned. In the city, days passed with a gentleness Zena had never known. She learned to walk without fear, to eat without permission, to speak without bracing for insults. Elijah didn't crowd her. He gave her space. He asked, not demanded. When she woke one morning to find a garden of jasmine planted outside her window, she knew he had been listening when she mentioned her mother's favorite scent. One evening, as they walked through the garden hand in hand, she looked at him and said quietly, "You didn't just rescue me. You reminded me I existed." He squeezed her fingers. "And you reminded me I still had a heart." That night, she stood at the window of the glass-walled library and watched the rain fall gently over the estate. No longer the rain of sorrow, but of cleansing, of beginnings. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time she was no longer afraid. The rain came quietly that morning, falling in soft sheets over the tiled rooftops and blooming gardens of the estate. Zena sat by the arched window of the sunroom, her cream-colored gown pooling gently around her feet, a book resting unopened on her lap. Outside, the world was green and hushed, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and wet earth. It had been 6 months since she walked out of the church with Elijah, 6 months of learning to breathe, to smile without flinching, to wake up without dread. The house had become her sanctuary, not because it was filled with wealth, but because it was filled with warmth. Elijah's staff had come to treat her not as a mistress they must tolerate, but a woman they admired. She spoke to them by name, remembered birthdays, and treated every hand that served her with the same dignity she had once longed for herself. In return, they gave her quiet loyalty. Elijah remained patient, never rushing her, never demanding her transformation. He simply loved her in silence, showing up every morning with tea, every evening with stories, and every time she faltered with his hand outstretched. That morning, as the rain traced lines across the window pane, a soft knock broke her reverie. It was the gatekeeper. He bowed low and spoke with quiet respect. "Madam, there are visitors from your village. They ask to see you." Zena looked at him for a long moment. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "Let them in," she said, her voice even. Moments later, the double doors of the sitting room opened, and in walked the 4 ghosts of her past. Mr. Benson entered first, his wrapper soaked, his steps unsteady. Behind him, Clara followed barefoot, her face pale and aged, her once towering posture bent low. Naomi and Tricia came in last, no longer laughing, no longer adorned, their faces drawn, their eyes swollen. They stopped before her, and slowly, each one of them knelt on the polished marble floor. "Zena, our daughter, Mr." Benson began, his voice cracked as though years of pride had shattered inside his throat. "We have come to beg you, to ask for something we never gave you mercy." Clara broke down then, her hands shaking. "We didn't know your worth. We treated you like nothing. We believed lies. We forgot you were a child with a heart. Naomi and Tricia bowed deeper. "Sister," Naomi whispered, "we were wrong. We mocked you, we envied you, and we buried our guilt in laughter." Tricia sobbed beside her. "We see it now. We were blind." Zena said nothing. She watched them all, not with fury, not with triumph, but with something more powerful: stillness. The kind of stillness that only grows in a heart that has weathered every storm and found peace on the other side. Slowly, she rose from her seat. Her gown whispered against the floor as she stepped forward. "You didn't want me when I had nothing," she said softly. "You gave me away thinking you were ridding yourselves of a burden. But what you didn't know was that I was your blessing in disguise." Mr. Benson bowed lower. Clara wept openly. Naomi wiped her nose with the sleeve of her blouse. Tricia pressed her forehead to the ground. Zena looked at each of them in turn. "You took my mother's place and filled it with bitterness," she said to Clara. "You were meant to protect me," she said to her father. "You wore new dresses while I wore pain," she said to her sisters. "You called me a maid, but now I sit where you refuse to let me stand." Their tears flowed harder. They didn't interrupt. They didn't defend. And Zena, standing tall before them, finally exhaled. "I forgive you," she said. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of every silent night, every slap, every hungry morning she endured. "Not because you deserve it, but because I want to be free. I won't carry your shame anymore." Mr. Benson looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Thank you. That's more than we deserve," Clara whispered. "Please, can we stay?" Zena shook her head gently. "Forgiveness is not forgetfulness. You are not here because you love me. You are here because you saw my glory and you want to share it. But peace does not mean access." She turned away and walked out of the sitting room, not with arrogance, not with vengeance, but with grace. Behind her, the sound of sobs echoed through the marble halls. They would leave empty-handed, but not unchanged. That evening, Elijah found her in the garden where the roses had just begun to bloom again after the rain. She sat quietly, her face turned toward the orange light of the setting sun. He didn't ask what happened. He simply sat beside her. After a moment, she reached for his hand and whispered, "Thank you for letting me choose, even when I didn't know how." He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask for anything in return. "You chose with your heart, and I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She leaned against his shoulder and looked up at the sky, which had turned the color of ripe mangoes. In her hand, she still held the gold locket he gave her on that night under the mango tree, the symbol of everything she never asked for but had finally received. Not because she begged for it, but because she became it. In a world that tried to erase her, she had written her name in grace, and it would never be forgotten.